occasion. Loretta is in town from New York City, so I thought I would take advantage and for anyone who's interested to hear how she became fluent in Japanese.
Hi! I'm going to talk today about language acquisition and the idea of speaking more than anything, because that's obviously one of the hardest things that we all try to learn to do. Writing, listening, reading, those are all different functions, but speaking is particularly difficult most of the time. And it shouldn't be. So when I first started studying Japanese, I decided to open up a YouTube channel under KemushiChan. And one of the most common questions I got, obviously now that it was sort of public that I was speaking Japanese, people would always ask, why do you study Japanese? Why are you studying Japanese? The answer to that has changed over time. But there was a theme, basically, this idea that I want to become fluent. And it only dawned on me about a year ago, which is like basically about 10 years into it. I don't know what being fluent really meant. I came to the point where I can speak conversationally, I can enjoy going out with friends, but I still, when someone says, are you fluent? I still don't quite know if the answer is yes or no. I don't even know what being fluent is. But I think it's something that's important for all of us to think of. Why do you study language? To think of the goal of what we're studying, not just to say, I want to be fluent, but what is that actually that you were trying to achieve by studying language? So I want to actually ask you guys, why do you study English?
In my case, I need English to work, to make ends meet by having job.
Yeah.
That's the biggest reason.
It's a very big reason. It's a very big reason. Okay, great.
I wanted to be Robert De Niro.
It's a good goal. So, like to be an actor, or to be like cool, or the personality.
Cool.
Cool.
Partly because I want to read the English novels without any translation.
Exactly.
Yeah. And also I'm quite interested in English culture. So that's the part of the reasons I want to study English language.
English. British? English? American?
Both. Any English is okay.
Well, like we said, basically some of the main topics that people tend to focus on are for work, for relationships, to make friends, sometimes for your wife, your husband, for your relationships, also for travel. But then again, this idea of to be fluent. There's so many people who will say, to be fluent, I want to be able to be like, to live in this world and be fluent, not have any obstacles. But what is that? So we may not know what being fluent is at the moment, but we do know what it is that gets in the way of being fluent. We all have these common hurdles that we face. It's mostly because language is infinite. There are infinite amounts of ways you can say something, of ways you can put together sentences. There are infinite possibilities of what you can say. Vocabulary is infinite. Also the number of rules, and in the case of English, the number of exceptions to the rules is especially frustrating. And again, the possibility for new words. Languages are alive, they're not dead. So with each new generation, there are always new people saying new things. But the idea is that the number of sentences that we can generate in a language is infinite, but only a small portion of them is actually correct or usable or communicable in speech. So that's really what's difficult. You can study all of these things, but still, what is that small little bit that is actually correct, and how do we keep using the correct ones and not the incorrect ones? So this is actually called is native selection in a lot of theories. It's the idea that native speakers have the ability to just know what sounds correct, that they just know this subset that we're all trying to figure out just naturally. But this is something we want to acquire. We want to acquire that intuition that, oh, I know it sounds wrong, but I don't know why. We all try to acquire this skill, but that in itself is very difficult. So I want to ask a quick little bit.
Which is correct?
So, exactly. I gave him the book back. I gave him back the book. I gave back the book to him. I gave the book back to him. I gave the book to him back. I gave back him the book. The correct ones are the top, or the used ones that you'll hear used. I gave him the book back. I gave him back the book. I gave back the book to him. I gave the book back to him. But the other ones are a little bit awkward. But if you ask a native speaker why, looking at this, you may not know necessarily the rule or the reason, but you just know, for some reason, these two sound wrong. So here's another idea of this native selection, this intuition for what sentences sound correct or well-formed. So past tense. I fold my clothes, and yesterday anybody?
Past tense.
Folded. I folded my clothes. Today, I scold my child. Yesterday,
Scold.
today I hold my child.
Held.
I held. What is this? But still, native speakers just know this, oh, it's held, it's definitely not holded. Another interesting one is this idea of phonology, what we hear and know that's right and wrong. So for example, in English, if I said blick, you know that that's not a word, but you know that it's possibly, it could be a word. Whereas bnick is not a word and could not be a word in English. The sounds just, bnick is not a sound that would be made in English. In Japanese, I made these up. Hasumeru is not a word, but, you know, it could sound Japanese. Whereas ha-meu, ha? It definitely can't be a word, and it just doesn't even sound like one at all. So there's these ideas, we have an idea of what, even if these are nonsense, but they still sound possible. And that intuition of it's possible is what we're trying to zoom in on. So how do native speakers know this? Where does this intuition come from? What is this natural ability that is so impossible? Dun dun dun! Here is our champion. Noam Chomsky is a philosopher that's known as the father of modern linguistics, and he had this idea that native speakers have sort of a machine in their brain that knows exactly, it knows all the rules. This machine can spit out all the words that are correct and keep out all the words that are incorrect. So what is it that's missing from a non-native speaker? What is this X factor that would make us native? If it's this automated grammar machine, if it's knowing every rule and just knowing it like the back of your own hand, or naturally, then maybe just memorizing grammar would be the way to become fluent. Is that right? No, it is not correct. We have so many friends, I'm sure, who study from textbooks all the time. They study rules, they study grammar, but the first time they're in a real natural speaking environment, suddenly all of that doesn't work. It sounds strange. And that sort of idea of grammar not being the key is one sort of confusing element, because we think if we study grammar, we'll become fluent. So this X factor, what is this difference? Like we said, is it memorizing grammar? No. Is it knowing vocabulary? But children, for example, a native child doesn't have a complete vocabulary of their language. They don't know every word, but yet they're still fluent. They're native. They still have an intuition in their head. So it's not vocabulary either. If native speakers don't know every word and every grammar rule perfectly, then what is fluency? If it's not vocabulary, if it's not grammar, what is it? One of the things I believe is that it is that intuition. It is exactly that idea that you know something is wrong. You hear it because you have a connection in your brain of something that you've already heard in the past. So for example, you know that there's a certain grammar or a certain pattern, and then you just apply new words. If it's a new vocabulary, you can just insert a new word and still understand from the context of what you already know. You have those connections. Additionally, there is also the idea of what I call ritual usage. This basically means that there are certain times when no matter what, even if a sentence is grammatical, it is still not correct in the situation. For example, if somebody said, "Will you marry me?" "Will you marry me?" is sort of like a set phrase. But if you've heard someone say, "It is my deepest desire to spend the rest of my life with you," that's another way to say it that you might not have learned in a book or in a textbook, but it's situationally from a different context, different times and different contexts. For example, slang. There are many times when you'll hear children say, "What's up? What's up?" They may not necessarily say that in formal situations. So the idea is that you cannot just simply force yourself to memorize these grammars and these phrases and just become fluent. You have to immerse yourself in these different situations. How do we get to this intuition? How do we get to this fluency? One of the most important things that I've found in my study is the idea of realizing that goal and being very specific with it. So not just saying, I want to be fluent, or I want to have friends, but specifically, I like to cook. So I want to be able to cook and explain how I cook in Japanese. Or I like to knit. I want to be able to knit a sweater and talk about it in Japanese. Something like that. This idea of you know exactly why you're learning this language, and so you do not waste time. It stays very personal and exciting to you. And that's why I always say language is personal. It should always be personal, and that's the best way to keep it alive within yourself. On top of that, you have to improve your self-study methods. So here we have 4 functions of language: speaking, writing, listening, and reading. Some of you may have heard me say this before, but these 2 on the top, speaking and writing, are things that you create. These are all proactive things, whereas listening and reading are all passive. These are things where you sit and take it in, and that's it. End of story. What really helped me with my studies was focusing mostly on active learning. So no matter what, even if I was reading something, I was always reading it aloud. If I was listening to something, I was still mouthing along with it or repeating or doing something like that. The idea that if you sit here and take in language and you never use the muscles that actually need to produce the language, if you never use your tongue to speak, if you only use your ears, it's not going to work. These are separate. So it's very important to make sure to always be proactive when you are studying. But the idea is really just to always bring in new sources and find ways to sort of repeat them, imitate them, spit them back out. I have a lot of friends who will ask me, how do you speak without thinking about it? How do you speak without having to process it? It's because I'm not thinking. It's in my tongue. It's in my tongue's muscle memory, so I don't have to think. It's like it's a loss if the first time that you say something and you stutter is only because you've never said it before. If you know the phrase, if you can hear it and you know what it is, then you should be able to say it. And the way to say that is to practice it. Like Robert De Niro, if he's your favorite, then if I were you, I would copy him every day. I would copy his every word, I would memorize his movies, I would know the lines, and somehow I would take him on and become myself. But that's how I do it. Thank you.